Tonight I want to tell you the story of a boy. A boy who was living with his mother and his sister, and whose life turned horribly wrong when he was 9 years old. Because during that year his grandfather had died. And also it came out that his mother's boyfriend had an affair. And for his mother, she became filled with anger, hate, sadness. And the only way to properly describe what she felt like was that she turned insane. Meanwhile, her father's heritage was due to be discussed. And in her quickly developing insanity, she turned on her own family. She manipulated them, insulted them, and ultimately, she repelled her own sister and her own mother for good. So the last place she could lash out was at home. The air around her got different. Her mindset of blaming anyone but her infested it. So her own children felt accused of things they didn't know and things they didn't do, just by being in the same room as her. So, 1 second, just a little back up. So, one thing was weird though. The boy didn't act out in school. How could that be? Well, the mother had also become suicidal, and his older sister, who was only 12 years old at that time, stopped her from committing suicide multiple times. So if the boy had acted out at school, people would have taken notice. People would have taken the children away from her mother, and by doing so, they would have taken away the last reason for her to be alive. And the boy knew that, very painfully. So that wasn't an option. And when he was 10 years old, he laid in bed during the night. And laying in bed, he weighed his options. His mother couldn't raise him. He realized that. He couldn't count on help. He knew that. So he made the decision to raise himself. Can you feel it? Can you imagine it? A 10-year-old boy laying in bed at night, making this decision. A decision way beyond his age group. Can you imagine what he felt like? Well, I tell you how I felt at night. I wasn't quite able to grasp what that decision would demand of me, but I could feel its weight quite clearly. And to me it wasn't a decision. I simply didn't have many other options left. So, laying in bed, I decided to raise myself. And just another blackout, fucking up. I lay in bed, deciding to raise myself. And it took quite a big toll on me, but I wasn't afraid of the decision of raising myself. What really was frightening to me was that by doing so, I had to openly admit that something was off, that something wasn't going the normal way, and that my mother is not okay. By doing so, I had to openly admit that the only adult person I was in proper contact with was the one that being the most dangerous to me. So I went on a journey of trying to raise myself with, let's say, moderate success. But I had one big issue. I couldn't lash out anywhere. I had all these pent-up emotions, and I couldn't lash out in school for the told reasons. I couldn't lash out at home. I couldn't lash out at my mother because I couldn't blame her. I couldn't be mad at her because I knew that mom is sick and that it's not her fault. So, without any place to lash out, I finally discovered something when I was around 11 years old. Daydreaming. And daydreaming is a tricky topic because most people don't realize that it can be very dangerous. Because daydreaming is very much like alcoholism. You start sporadically, you get ever more drunk, you do it ever more often, and the transition is so smooth that you don't realize which path you're on until one day you wake up as an addict. And here's the catch with daydreaming. Whatever you're imagining, you might be the hero of the story, you might be someone who's enduring a lot of pain instead of others, you might be someone who's taking himself back even though there would be any reason not to do so. In any of your imaginations, whatever you do, even if you're just a spectator, there's something about your attitude or your behavior which is holy, which is saintful. And you're actually feeling that. Because as we're imagining things, we're literally feeling the emotions of the story. If there's love, you feel love. If there's ecstasy, you feel ecstasy. Our body is producing a proper response to our imagination. So that was the way I could let off steam properly, without anyone noticing what was going on. Dostoevsky had put it so nicely when he called it the golden spiderwebs of imagination. Because this combination of the holiness of your own character and you actually feeling all the emotions, it's a really alluring thing. And it lured me in deeper and deeper into imagination. And by doing so, my scenarios became less luminous, less heroic, and darker, reflecting my life experience up to that point a lot better. And I even started imagining scenarios that would justify how I did feel in reality. Scenarios that justify my sadness, that would justify my pain, that would justify my rage and hate towards life. And as I did so, I went ever deeper and deeper. And by doing so, I left reality behind more and more. I didn't realize what was going around me. So everything I did in reality, all my actions and reactions, were done on autopilot, as I was going deeper and deeper into imaginations. Well, eventually there was a very potent emotion mixed into it, self-pity. And as I started drowning in it, my imaginations went even darker, and someone dimmed the lights. Colors started fading, and I started drifting off into absolute darkness. I woke up from it when I was 17. I knew I was depressed. I knew I was on the edge of suicide. And yet, I didn't know where it had all gone wrong. I didn't know because I couldn't remember it. I was so deep down into imagination, I couldn't remember the starting point. So I had to figure it out. What did go wrong? So what did go wrong was that my defense mechanism of daydreaming has detached me from reality. I was so departed from it that I literally didn't know I was still alive. So now I had that figured out. But even though I had figured out what was going on, I couldn't come back to reality. I just simply didn't know how to. So that was the point where I eventually and finally reached out for help. And with that help, it took me 2 years to get back on track, to get back to a place which I wouldn't label as being depressed. That point has been 3 years ago. Since then, I'm back on track. I'm back connected with my emotions, my thoughts, and with reality. And in retrospect, I am really grateful for the experience. Because by having that experience, I've learned a lot. For example, I've learned that pain and suffering are probably the best teachers we could have. Not the nicest ones, but pretty good ones. Right now I'm 21, and my mother and my auntie still have their heritage dispute, which escalated so much that I am in debt because of it. My grandma can barely walk because of her age, and my father is suffering from heavy dementia. And even though all of this is very heavy to digest, very hard to digest, I know that the worst thing that could happen to me is that I once again fall in despair with something as truly magical as life. And so I won't.